Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. In case you're new here, my name's Jennifer. Now, it is cold and dreary outside. It was rainy all day today, and we're getting into the cold part of the year. And when it's cold and dreary outside, there's nothing more comforting than a delicious home-cooked soup. We love to have a lot of soup in the winter, and in this video, I'm going to share with you some of my favorite delicious soups, and these are also so easy. Today we're going to start with what is probably the easiest soup that I make. It's so easy that honestly it almost feels like cheating. We are going to be making a really quick and easy chicken tortilla soup. Now I love to make this soup when I have leftover chicken. It's a great way to use up leftover chicken. Also, a lot of times after Thanksgiving, I'll turn it into a turkey tortilla soup and use up some of my leftover turkey that way. So if you're watching this video right after Thanksgiving, that's a great use for some of your leftover turkey. Today I did not have any leftover chicken, so I popped some chicken thighs into my Instant Pot. I'm cooking them up in there. Once those chicken thighs finish cooking, we're going to take them out of the Instant Pot and shred them up. So I think the main reason that this soup recipe is so easy is that rather than chopping a bunch of fresh ingredients, I'm using salsa, which already has all of my peppers and onions and garlic and all that already chopped. So we're going to use a jar of salsa and add it right into our pan here. So I'm just going to turn this burner up to about medium-high heat and cook this salsa just for a couple minutes to really heat everything up. While our salsa is heating up, I'm going to prep some of the other ingredients. So I have here a jar of cannellini beans that I canned last year. So I'm just going to go ahead and strain and rinse these. Our salsa has been boiling for a couple minutes, so I'm just going to turn the heat down to low while we add some other ingredients to it. To our salsa, we're going to add about a tablespoon of ground cumin. The spices are to taste, so you can add more or less depending on the flavor you prefer. And we're going to add a teaspoon of chili powder. That was probably about a heaping teaspoon. Stir our seasonings in. We'll add in the cannellini beans that we drained and rinsed. And about half a package or so of frozen corn. This is probably closer to 3/4 of a package, but this is a really flexible recipe here. Our chicken finished cooking in the Instant Pot, so I'm going to go ahead and shred this chicken up too. Now I will say this is more chicken than we're going to need for just this soup. I made a little bit extra chicken so that we can use some shredded chicken in our dinner tomorrow as well. Tomorrow we're going to have, or at least later this week, in the next couple days, we're going to have barbecue chicken pizza, and having some shredded chicken already cooked for that will make preparing that meal a lot easier too. So I'm just going to shred this chicken up, and we're going to add, I'll see how much we get. We're probably going to add about half of it, maybe a little more than half into our soup here. If I cook the chicken in a little bit of chicken broth in the Instant Pot on high pressure for about 10 minutes, I find that it just completely falls apart. And these chicken thighs look nice and moist. These will be really delicious. Now I do want to mention that in the video description I'll be linking all of these recipes, so if you're interested in trying any of these recipes, that's where you can find the link to them. Except for this one. This was actually a recipe that I just got from a friend. I have no idea where it came from originally. So this one I'll go ahead and type out the ingredients for you in the video description. But as you can see, just from watching me make it, it's extremely flexible. And this is just a great go-to when you don't have a lot of time to cook dinner and you want something quick and easy. And if you had home canned salsa, that would make this even better. But I'm just using the store-bought jarred salsa because that's what I have on hand right now. So we're going to add, let's see, probably about half, maybe 2/3 of this chicken right into the soup. And if you don't have an Instant Pot, you could certainly poach your chicken instead and shred it that way. I find the Instant Pot is so easy and makes it a really hands-off process, and I think it makes it a little bit easier to shred, but you certainly don't have to cook it that way if you prefer not to. Now we also want to add some chicken broth. This recipe calls for about 3 cups or so of chicken broth. I cooked this chicken with chicken broth right in the Instant Pot, so I'm just going to use that same chicken broth right in the soup. The first thing I'm going to do is actually take my salsa jar, and I'm going to use the chicken broth to get that last little bit of salsa out of the jar. That way we make sure we get every little bit of flavor from that salsa. And I'm just going to add the rest of the broth from the Instant Pot right into our soup. Now you can see just how easy the soup is. All of the soup ingredients are in our pan. We're just going to heat this up to a boil and let it simmer for about 10 minutes and just let everything cook through fully and all the flavors really combine. So when it's time to serve this soup, I'm just going to ladle it into a bowl. We're going to top it with some crushed up tortilla chips, a little dab of sour cream, sprinkle it with a little bit of grated cheddar cheese and some chopped scallions, and that's about as easy as it gets. So with the soup tonight, I have some fresh baked bread in the oven. We are going to serve this soup with bread, and we're also going to just have a little bit of a side salad. So easy and so delicious and so comforting on a cold night. So that's our chicken tortilla soup. I'll meet you back here in the kitchen next time we're cooking soup. We're back in the kitchen, and today we're making another really fast, easy, and really delicious soup recipe. This soup recipe, well, we mostly eat soup during the colder months. This soup is actually light enough and kind of has a bright enough fresh flavor that you could actually have this during the summer too. We still do prefer to have it this time of year, so we're going to go ahead and make it today. Now, I am going to link this recipe in the video description. I do want to mention though that I am making this recipe even easier than what the recipe calls for. The recipe calls for actually peeling these tomatoes by dipping them in boiling water and peeling the skins off. I have done it that way before, and there have been times when I just needed to save time and I just cut it with the skin on. Honestly, I don't find that it makes a big enough difference to be worth the extra effort. So we are going to save that time and just leave the skins on our tomatoes. We're going to start by adding, I don't know, about a tablespoon or so of olive oil in the pan. I'm not really going to measure it. I should also mention, in case you want to make this recipe yourself, that I am actually cutting this recipe in half. I find that when I make the full recipe, it makes quite a bit more than what my family will eat in one night. So today we're going to be cutting it in half. So I'm going to turn our heat on about medium, and while our olive oil is heating up, we're going to get started chopping an onion. So because I'm cutting this recipe in half, and because that was a fairly large onion, I don't actually need all of it. So I'm just going to take the extra onion and put it in a Ziploc bag. We're just going to freeze it up, and then that is going to come in handy next time we need just a small amount of onion for a recipe. And we're just going to add the rest of this onion right into our olive oil here. While our onion starts to saute, we are going to get started chopping our garlic. So I need 3 cloves of garlic that we're going to really finely chop. Our onions have been sauteing for about 5 minutes. As you can see, they're starting to brown on the edges. So it's time to go ahead and add our chopped garlic. Now just a note when it comes to chopping raw garlic, if you want to get the most nutritional bang for your buck when it comes to garlic, or the most medicinal properties from your garlic, it's best to chop it up and let it sit exposed to the air for a few minutes before you add it into whatever you're cooking. So most places say 5 to 10 minutes. What's going to happen is when the garlic reacts with the oxygen, it creates this compound called allicin, and that is where most of the medicinal and health benefits of the garlic come from. So it's always a great idea to chop it up and let it sit for a little bit. Now, I am sure that those medicinal benefits are strongest if you have garlic raw. Most of us probably would prefer not to do that because it does have a very strong flavor. But most of the... Okay, that's really sizzling. Most of the sources that I've seen say that a large amount of that allicin is preserved even throughout cooking. So it's definitely something that's worth doing. So now to our onion and garlic, I'm going to add 4 cups of chicken broth. I just have store-bought chicken broth today because that's what I have on hand. I'm all out of homemade. This soup would obviously be even better if you have homemade chicken broth, but for today, as I said, we're just making do with what we have on hand. So 1 box of chicken broth and about a half teaspoon of sugar goes into that. Half a teaspoon of sugar. And I just realized that my kitchen hood was on that whole time, so hopefully you could actually hear what I'm saying. If not, if I go to edit this video and find out that you really can't hear what I'm saying, I'll do a voiceover for that part. So what we want to do now is let this broth come up to a boil. While it's heating up and coming up to a boil, we are going to dice our tomatoes. I'm going to season this soup with a little bit of salt and pepper. Now, as you can see, it's come to a boil. It's time to add our tortellini and our tomatoes. So the recipe actually calls for adding the tortellini first and then adding the tomatoes for about the last minute or so of the tortellini cooking time. I am actually using frozen tortellini. I was unable to get fresh tortellini this week. Again, that would make your soup be much improved if you have fresh tortellini, but frozen is what I was able to get, so that's what we have. It only cooks for 3 minutes, and because we did not blanch our tomatoes to remove the skin, they're going to take a little bit longer to cook. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add about half of this package of tortellini into my soup. I'm also going to add these tomatoes in. So I think I'm actually going to use a little bit less than half of this package. It's a family package. It's a little bit larger than I realized. So I think I've already used half this package. I think half of the tortellini that I have left will be perfect. And then all of our tomatoes go right into this pot as well. So I used 5 Roma tomatoes that I just basically roughly diced, and we're going to add those right into our soup. I'm going to bring our soup back up to a boil, and then we're going to cook the tortellini and tomatoes for about 3 minutes. This recipe also calls for some fresh basil. We just had our first frost a couple days ago, so I unfortunately have no fresh basil in my garden. So I'm going to use one of my basil ice cubes. I froze some basil with chicken broth in my ice cube tray. So we're going to pop one of those into the soup, and that will be just as good as fresh. These little basil ice cubes are my favorite way to preserve fresh basil. I find that dehydrated really just doesn't retain the flavor well. I do have a video of that process that I made, I think last summer. It was actually one of my very first early videos. So I can link that below if you're interested in that process. Basically, I just chop up my basil and freeze it with either chicken broth or olive oil. And that way I can just pop it out of the freezer and use it just like fresh. And it adds that fresh summer flavor to anything that you cook with it. Our tortellini and tomatoes have cooked for 3 minutes. They're all done, so now we're going to add some spinach. I've turned off the heat, and we are just going to add this fresh spinach right into our soup. If you have cooked with fresh spinach before, you know that what looks like a ridiculous amount of spinach can very quickly wilt down into almost nothing. So I'm just going to use up the rest of this container of spinach, just add it right to my soup. We're just going to enjoy this soup really simply tonight. I'm just going to serve up bowls of the soup. We're going to grate some fresh Parmesan cheese on top. That is an essential step, so definitely don't skip that. And then I'm going to serve it with some slices of my delicious homemade honey oat bread. Now, admittedly, the honey oat bread, it's not a really crusty bread like you'd think of having with a soup. It's really more of a softer sandwich bread. But we hadn't had it in a while, and I decided to make it today. So that's really easy and delicious. I may make a video at some point of how to make that bread recipe. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely be sure to let me know in the comments. So we're just going to eat this soup with Parmesan cheese on top, with a slice of honey oat bread, and just a simple salad on the side. So as you can see, this is a really quick and easy dinner, and so delicious. I'll meet you back here in the kitchen next time we're making soup. We're back in the kitchen today, and today we are going to be making one of my favorite hearty, satisfying soups for winter. We're actually going to be making a double batch today because we are going to be taking some to a family that just had a baby in our church, and the other half will be for my family for dinner. Tonight we're making an Italian sausage soup, and as I said, I'll be doubling the recipe. I'm going to start by heating up a little bit of olive oil in this pan over a medium heat. I am going to link this recipe in the video description along with all the other recipes, but you will notice if you click on that recipe that I am making a couple changes, so I'll fill you in on those as we go through this recipe. Now that the pan is nice and hot, I'm going to start by browning 2 pounds of Italian sausage. You can use spicy sausage if you want to. I prefer the sweet sausage, so that's what I'm using today. So tell me, do you have any random chore or task that you just inexplicably really don't like for no real reason? Mine is breaking up meat while it's browning. I found this trick, I think I saw it on a TV show ages ago. Using a potato masher as opposed to a wooden spoon really helps me out a lot and makes this job a little more bearable. One of those things that's not really a big deal, and shouldn't really annoy me as much as it does, but for some reason it does. So any little trick I can find to make it a little bit better, I'm going to take advantage. So now that I've gotten all that ground sausage broken up and starting to brown, I'm going to add in a diced onion. Now I have here 1 large onion that I diced. You could certainly do 2 small or 2 medium onions if you prefer. So this is one of the changes that I made. If I'm remembering right, this recipe did not actually call for any onion, but anytime I do this kind of cooking, I mean, I can't imagine not cooking with onion, so I added an onion into this recipe. While our onion and sausage brown and cook down, I'm going to prep a few cloves of garlic. Also going to slice up a few of these carrots here. Now that our sausage and onion is nicely browned, we're going to go ahead and add our chopped garlic right into the pot. Give that a nice stir. Now you certainly could drain off the grease if you want to. I don't think that the sausage really gave out a lot of grease, so we're just going to let it be. I'm going to open up 2 cans of stewed tomatoes and add those right in with our sausage mixture. My cat heard me open a can, and he's thinking it might have been a can of tuna, so he's always got to check and see. We also want 2 quarts of beef broth. What I like to do is add my beef broth into the can I just took the tomatoes out of and use it to kind of grab any little tomato bits that might be remaining. And it's just a way to make sure that we don't waste anything. Give this a little bit of a stir. Next, we're going to add in all these carrots. I'm going to season this soup with a little bit of salt and pepper. I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit just so that it comes up to a simmer. Once it comes up to a simmer, I'm going to cover it, I'm going to reduce the heat, and we're going to let it simmer on a low heat for about 15 minutes. While that soup simmers, I'm going to prep our zucchini. Now I have here 3 small zucchinis. The recipe actually calls for 2 zucchinis. Since I'm doubling it, 4 would have been the right amount. But normally when I get zucchinis from curbside pickup, they pick up my produce for me, they give me really big zucchinis. So I only asked for 3. But this time they actually gave me small ones, so I probably should have asked for 4. I think that it will still be fine with all the other goodness that's in the soup. Our soup has been simmering for about 15 minutes now, and we are going to add 2 cans of cannellini beans. I drained and rinsed these. That's another departure from the recipe. The recipe says to just add them in along with the liquid that they were canned in. I don't like to do that. I like to be able to control the amount of sodium and flavor that's in my recipe. So I always drain and rinse them, and then I can add a little extra salt if I need to. We're also going to add all of the zucchini that we diced up. So I'm going to return this soup to a simmer. Once it comes back up to a simmer, which shouldn't take too long, I'm going to cover it again, and this time I'm going to simmer it for 5 minutes. Now that our soup has simmered with the zucchini and the beans for 5 minutes, I'm going to add 2 cups of pasta. I chose this little ditalini, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I chose this little tube shape here because this is one of my favorites for soup, but you could certainly use any small cut of pasta that you prefer. So 2 cups of pasta added in. We're going to bring it back to a simmer and then cover and simmer for 10 minutes. The final ingredient that we want to add to our soup is some spinach. Now spinach is one of those things, if you add it to something like a soup, you can add basically a heaping amount and it looks like you're going to ruin your soup. You can see this giant pile of spinach I added to the soup here. This will cook down to almost nothing, and it'll get to the point where you will barely even notice it in the soup. So now that I've added the spinach, I'm just going to turn off the heat. I'm going to cover the pot back up, and we're just going to let the residual heat from the soup just gently wilt the spinach, and Then in a couple minutes, it'll be ready to serve. So we're gonna serve this soup really simply with some grated cheese on top. We could either fresh grate some Parmesan or sprinkle a little bit of mozzarella. Any kind of Italian cheese will really complement the flavors in this soup. We're just going to have it alongside some focaccia bread that I made earlier today and just a really simple side salad, and that's gonna be dinner tonight. We're back in the kitchen today making another really easy and delicious soup recipe. Today's soup recipe is going to be a roasted cauliflower cheddar soup, and I'm so excited about this. We haven't had this in a while, so let's get started making it. This soup calls for 1 large head of cauliflower. It's at about 2.5 pounds. This head of cauliflower that I have here I think is slightly under that, so I have a second cauliflower here that I'll cut into if I need to, but I think this will be most of what we need. So the first thing we're going to do is get this cauliflower roasted. I have my oven preheating to 425 degrees. While it preheats, we're going to cut this cauliflower up into small florets. I'm going to arrange them on a baking sheet, drizzle them with olive oil, season with salt and pepper, and then we're going to get that roasted up for our soup. So you can see that we got a whole big sheet pan of cauliflower. I used that whole first head of cauliflower, and then I used 1/4 of the second head. So I'm just going to toss this with a little bit of olive oil, and we're going to sprinkle some salt and pepper on it. I've always kind of thought of cauliflower as an underrated, underappreciated vegetable. It's very humble, but it's really, really good. And especially when you roast it. Roasting is the secret trick that I think just gives vegetables so much depth of flavor. It just brings out their sweetness. It's really good. And cauliflower is a perfect candidate for roasting. So we also, in addition to this roasted cauliflower soup, we also really like to have roasted cauliflower as a side dish. A lot of times I will mix it with equal parts broccoli. We'll roast it the exact same way and just enjoy it as a side dish. I'm going to grab a pair of tongs and just give this a little toss. So my oven is almost preheated up to 425 degrees. Once it comes up to temperature, I'm going to toss this cauliflower in the oven for about 20 to 25 minutes until it's nicely roasted and it's starting to get golden brown on the edges. So once we pull out of the oven, I'll meet you back here and we'll continue on with our soup. Our cauliflower is just about to come out of the oven, so I've moved on with the next steps of our soup. In this pan here, I am going to melt about 2 to 3 tablespoons of butter over medium heat. Here you can see I've chopped up an onion. Once our butter's all melted, we are going to get this onion sauteing in the pan. I've also pre-measured out 2 cups of chicken broth and 3 cups of milk. We're going to be using those in our soup in just a minute. Here's our cauliflower right out of the oven. You can see that it's got these nice golden brown edges. This is done. We're just going to set it aside, let it cool off just a little bit while we do the next steps of our soup. Our butter is melted and sizzling, so let's get this onion added into the butter. Try not to make too much of a mess here. So I'm just going to let this butter soften and cook for about 5 minutes. While it's cooking, I'm going to chop up our garlic and also some fresh thyme I grabbed from the garden. So I find fresh herbs like thyme to be one of the most satisfying things to grow. It was 20 degrees outside at my house last night, and this thyme still looks just as good as it did in the summer. I don't know if you can really see that, but thyme is very cold hardy. In my area, I'm here in Connecticut in zone 6. It survives the winter really easily, and while I may not be able to harvest it all winter long, I can certainly harvest it well into the winter. So I just like to strip the leaves off the stem by running my finger backwards down the length of the stem. Sometimes a few at the end I kind of have to pull off. But for the most part, that gets the leaves off. So I'm just going to strip off all these thyme leaves, and then we're just going to give them a little bit of a quick chop just to release some of the flavor. I've also got some fresh parsley from outside in the garden here. Now you can see this also survived our 20-degree night really well. This definitely won't survive all winter, but it is cold hardy up to a certain extent. So I'm just going to give this a nice fine chop. So you can see our onions are nicely softened, starting to brown just a little bit. I'm going to add in about 2.5 tablespoons of flour right into our onions here. This is going to mix with the butter that the onions are cooking in and going to create a roux, which is what is going to thicken up our soup. This is a cream-based, or not really cream-based, but it's a creamy soup, and we like to thicken it up a little bit. So now that we've added this flour, we're going to let it cook for just a couple minutes. That will just help it develop a little bit of a better flavor. So I'm going to let it cook for about a minute or so. I think the recipe says a minute and a half. And for the last 30 seconds, which I'm going to say is now, we're going to add in our chopped garlic. Now that the garlic's been cooking for about 30 seconds, I'm going to switch to my whisk, and we're going to whisk in our 3 cups of milk. Just want to add this in slowly while whisking, and that's going to prevent the flour mixture from forming any lumps. Now that we have our milk incorporated, I'm going to do the same with the chicken broth. Now I'm going to measure out 1/2 cup of heavy cream, and then we're going to add this in as well. Now into our soup, we're going to add the herbs that we chopped. We've got our parsley and our thyme here. Also going to add in a bay leaf, just a dried bay leaf here. I'm going to add in a 1/4 teaspoon of sugar. I'm going to give this all a little stir with the whisk. And then we're going to add in all of our roasted cauliflower. Just stir this in. Then we're going to season with some salt and pepper. I'm going to heat this up just enough to bring it to a boil, and then I'm going to immediately turn it down to low. So our soup came up to a boil. I'm going to pull this bay leaf out. Next I want to take out 3 cups of this soup, and we're going to puree it in a blender. You could definitely use your immersion blender if you didn't want to take the soup out and puree it that way. I like to do it in a regular blender just because I want to make sure that I have enough chunks left in my soup. I don't want this to be a completely smooth soup. So here I've got about 3 cups of soup. I'm going to puree this up in the blender and add it back in with the rest of our soup. I'm just going to return this to the pot. As you can see, this is nice and smooth. Just going to grab a silicone spatula to scrape all of this goodness back into the pan. I have here a cup of shredded sharp white cheddar cheese. We're going to add that into the pan. And also have about a 1/4 cup of freshly grated Parmesan. And then we're just going to stir this up. I might have to bump the heat up just a little bit, just to make sure that everything is evenly hot, and we want to make sure to melt our cheese. So this soup is all done and ready to serve. We're just going to serve this really simply. Just ladle it into a bowl. We can sprinkle a little bit of extra Parmesan cheese on top of it. And I have some fresh, delicious focaccia bread that we're going to serve on the side of it. And then just a really simple green salad on the side. So we have one more soup to make together. I'll see you next time we're in the kitchen. So we're in the kitchen today making our final soup for this video. This is actually really more of a stew than a soup, but I decided to include it in the video anyway because I figured it was close enough. Now this is actually morning. This final recipe is a beef stew that is going to cook in the slow cooker. So I'm starting it bright and early this morning, and it's going to cook all day in the slow cooker and be ready for us when it's time for dinner tonight. Now the recipe I'm using is from this Betty Crocker cookbook here. I am going to see if I can find this cookbook and link it for you guys. I know this is a fairly old cookbook that I was actually given as a gift years ago. So if I can find it, I'll link that in the video description. So I'm going to start in this crock pot by mixing up all of my dry ingredients. So I first have 1/2 cup of flour. It's going to go in. And then we're going to need a teaspoon each of salt, sugar, and Italian seasoning. And I've got a ½ teaspoon here, so I'll do 2 ½ teaspoons of sugar. Then I want about a ¼ teaspoon of ground black pepper, which I'm not going to measure. I'm just going to grate a little bit in there. Just going to whisk and combine up these dry ingredients, and then we will get our wet ingredients added in. So I need a can of diced tomatoes with all the juice included. I'm going to add that right in. About a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. I usually go a little bit over whenever I have Worcestershire sauce in a recipe because I think it adds a really nice flavor. And finally, for our wet ingredients, I'm going to measure out about 2 cups of beef broth. I'm going to use this beef broth to rinse out this tomato can, just to make sure I get every little bit of tomato. Then I'm just going to mix this all up to combine the wet and dry ingredients together. I have here a whole onion that I chopped. We're going to add that right in. And then I have a bunch of these small red potatoes from my garden. So what I'm going to do is, all the little ones like this, I'm going to leave whole. The larger ones, I'm going to probably cut in half, maybe quarters for some of the larger ones, and just add those right into the stew as well. Now the recipe actually calls for a bag of baby carrots. If you do use that, that makes it really easy because they're already the right size and they're already peeled. I prefer to use larger carrots, so I'm just going to peel these and cut them into about the same size as baby carrots. We'll add a few of these into the stew also. I usually like to go a little bit heavy on the carrots because we really love the flavor of these carrots when they're cooked in the stew. So I'll add the carrots that we have here into the stew and see if it looks like enough. If not, I might add a little more. So I have here an 8-ounce package of pre-sliced cremini mushrooms. I like to get the pre-sliced just to save myself a little bit of a step. Now, if you don't like mushrooms, I know mushrooms are kind of a divisive topic, you can leave them out of this stew. I do find that they really add something, so I like to leave them in. Now we're just going to stir everything up. We've got everything in here except for our stew meat. I'm going to give everything a good stir because once we add our meat, we don't want to stir it. So finally I'm going to add about a pound, I think this is just slightly over a pound of beef stew meat. And I'm going to just put this on top and we're just going to let it sit. The recipe does say not to stir it. I usually do stir it in for the last maybe hour or 2 of cooking, but I like to let it sit undisturbed while it first starts. Just going to break it up a little bit. So having the meat on top does allow all those meat juices to really soak into the vegetables and give them an amazing flavor. Now, because this is a crock pot meal, this is going to sit and cook all day. I'm just going to turn it on low. So we're going to let this cook for at least 8 hours. I find that I usually actually like to let it cook a little bit more for the best flavor and the most tenderness of all the vegetables and meat. So it's about 9 o'clock in the morning here. So this is going to cook all day and it's finally going to be ready for us at dinner tonight. I'll meet you back here tonight when this is done cooking and I will show you how it turned out. So it's just about time to serve this beef stew. So I just want to show you guys what it looks like now. So you can see it's cooked up really nicely. And this is going to be really delicious. I love making slow cooker meals because then I can get all of the dinner work done in the morning, and by the end of the day, dinner is just ready and waiting for us. So I'm going to serve this tonight with some homemade biscuits that I had frozen. I just popped them right from the freezer into the oven and cooked those up. And I also made some fresh applesauce. We had some apples in our fridge that really needed to be used up, so they got turned into applesauce. So that's how we're going to eat this tonight. So thank you so much for joining me in this video as we made 5 soups together. You know, I really love soup this time of year. It's so comforting, and when it's cold and dreary outside, a bowl of soup can just warm you up and make you feel so much better. So if you do try any of these soup recipes, I would love to hear what you thought of any of the recipes that you tried. These are all tried and true favorites. My family loves all of them, so I definitely encourage you to give them a try. So thank you so much for hanging out with me over the past few weeks as we made these soups. I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you next time. I'll see you soon.